there, gang. I'm going to get into something maybe a little more relaxing this week. Kind of a rescue or a resuscitation. This is not a super valuable collector's guitar. The Patient is a 1970s Japanese instrument that is vaguely Gibson ES, thin line in shape and proportion, and it presents, unfortunately, with all of its guts missing. This is Adam's guitar, Adam being Adam Savage of Mythbusters, and more lately Adam Savage is Tested, which involves a YouTube channel wherein he and his crew document things that he makes and the tools that he employs and the people, subjects, and the technology that fascinate him. It's always a good watch. I've been a subscriber for quite some time, but I guess it was about 3 years ago now, probably during like early pandemic isolation, I guess. Adam ran into my channel somehow, fell down my little rabbit hole or funnel web spider's lair, and he gave me a couple of shout outs on his channel in videos. At that point, people started messaging me to make sure that I knew, and I was like, yes, I watched the video, he said my name. It still happens from time to time. Anytime he mentions me on his channel, I get messages, which aren't really necessary, but still appreciated. I actually love seeing people try to do that because my channel name is purposefully uninviting for verbal links or like trying to transfer the information without explanation. Is how do you pronounce it? It's missing vowels. There's no punctuation. It's like a lot of hipster websites circa 2011, you know. I'm not ever going to say it out loud, so there'll be no primary source for it. No one knows how to pronounce it. This isn't some influencer campaign of mine. I'm just sort of, it's just parts of my name smashed together in the way that these videos are parts of my day smashed together. But in addition to viewing, Adam reached out and we're now semi-occasional pen pals. And in the immortal words of Barney Gumble, we've been looking for a project to do together for a while. That's coming up, a sort of collaboration between the two of us. In the meantime, though, I've got this guitar that he wants me to put back into shape. And as he describes it, he encountered the instrument in 1990 in a theater where he was working at the time, and he inherited it when the theater closed down, as sometimes happens. It then followed him to the Mythbusters set and lived in the production offices there for 14 years. At this point, it lives in his cave, and he'd like to have it operational. More than just, you know, eye candy. This is sort of the heart of sentimental ownership. I'm not sure that this thing was ever truly operational in the 30-odd years that it's been in his possession. It's actually quite lively, just in its acoustic form, though. It's kind of satisfying to strum. And it looks good, too. You know, there's something to be said for the inherent coolness of having this kind of object in your room. You know, it is rock and roll. There is a kind of beauty in the sculptural marriage of the wood and the wire and the curves and the straight lines. You know, it is, it's the product of good mid-century design. So I don't really know how to pin it down in terms of dating. There was a nameplate on the headstock which is now missing. There's no label inside it. We do have this made in Japan stamp that comes from a time when that didn't really have the sort of cachet that it's got now. This is very much a student-level instrument. It's got a bolt-on neck. The tailpiece seems to have remnants of some kind of vibrato system that is not a Bigsby and could never be made to work like a Bigsby, so let's just leave that alone, shall we? The bridge is sort of reminiscent to something like a Fender Jazzmaster design, kind of. This is a fully hollow instrument. There's no central support block like you'd find in an ES335, and as frequently happens with some of these, there's a bit of warp in the plywood top. Some sinkage in front of the bridge. So it's actually, the bridge is leaning forward to a degree, which maybe we can remedy by propping it up a little bit from the inside. A fairly long headstock that reminds me maybe a bit more of an Epiphone than a Gibson, but we know who they're copying anyway. The neck employs a 0 fret, and this chunky solid brass nut, which is really more of a string spacer in this case with the 0 fret. I'm not sure that's original. Missing some paint around it, and it extends beyond the width of the fingerboard in a way that says, maybe not. Also, can you imagine putting a brass nut on this guitar? No, it would be plastic originally. Rosewood board, pearl-like plastic dots, One thing that's missing, there are no side dot markers, which is just diabolical on a guitar with 19 frets to the body. You know, we're going to put some on. What did the missing pickups look like? I don't know, but they weren't standard PAF style clones because the cutouts for them are much wider than standard rings, and the spacing is wrong. And, you know, a lot of Japanese instruments in the 60s and 70s had kind of funky pickup designs. I think we might need to make some custom risers to cover the little bit of excess here. A blend of dog ear and standard humbucker aesthetics, maybe. So I've got some pickups on order, and no, we're not sinking $300 into boutique pickups for this guitar. These are just going to be inexpensive. They actually have sort of Filtertron-inspired styling, so just a bit offbeat, you know. It's nice. It's unusual. The tuners are bad. There's like half a turn of free play before the gears engage. Again, I've got some cheap and cheerful Wilkinsons around with tulip heads and sealed gear, different style of stuff on the back, so we're probably going to end up plugging holes. But, you know, you're not going to put $120 tuners on it. It'll be much better than what's on there. That's the thing. When you're fixing up one of these pawn shop specials, if you're going for originality, the cost just becomes, like, unthinkable. It's a pristine example of this guitar. Absolutely perfect, never been touched, mint in case, with all of its markings, all the factory stuff. Might be worth, I don't know, $600 to the right collector, trying to relive his childhood. But as soon as something's missing and you have to replace it, the cost to find and restore it just goes out the window. So, you know, they immediately become a vehicle for self-expression and experimentation, and you make it work, you know? You just make it work. It's kind of the same with the electronics. You know, this isn't a Gibson, and it will never be mistaken for a Gibson, so you get to play a little bit fast and loose. You don't have to, you know, worry about that kind of collector's mindset. This was a bare bones circuit with a single volume, single tone, and a three-way switch. So it's basically a Telecaster with the controls in unfamiliar locations. The thing is, the potentiometer holes are actually quite far apart. And for a guitar like this, I kind of want to have individual volume controls for each pickup, because the pickup set I'm buying has fairly high output bridge and a more moderate neck. So balance can be a bit of an issue if you're playing them together. And, you know, I might want to have more neck in the blend. So I'm thinking I'll add a third control pod between these two and wire it volume, volume, tone, just for fun. This neck is not in bad condition, all things considered, given its age and its provenance. It's pretty fun to play. It's got a fairly slender profile, but it's comfortable. Action, we're currently sitting around 7/64 on the bass, about 5 at the treble, measured at the 12th fret, so a bit high. Measuring the neck relief with a capo on the 1st fret and holding down the string close to the body, we're looking at around 9/1000ths of an inch. It's not bad at all to start off with. Other things to take note of before we remove the strings. What do we think of this nut / string spacer? Is it okay? I think it's doing all right, although I did notice something while strumming it. On the D string specifically, this groove is not deep enough, so the string is flopping around on top of the 0 fret. It's not got enough downward pressure. Same with the A. So I think we should probably go ahead and deepen those slots. This bridge defies attempts to lower it any further using the thumb wheels. And it's got what looks like a strip of rosewood or something underneath it to act as a spacer. Don't know what that's about. Plus, when we put a prop on the inside to shore this area up, the action is likely to go up too, as it will raise the bridge along with everything else. So we'll probably end up using a shim in the neck pocket. What makes these things bad? Well, these inexpensive tuners, the post is captured by this little stamped thing on the base plate that comes up but does not go all the way around. It's open on one side. And over time, if there's any sort of eccentricity or if they're loose or something, you end up with uneven wear, and the barrel starts to tip relative to the gear, and it just gets worse and worse. More and more slop enters. There's not much you can do. These things are sort of headed for the trash immediately. There's sort of a fun little skunk stripe on this neck, with the central lamination being mahogany against the maple of the side wings. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but some of these screws are actually bent. These new tuners are a single screw design. They rely on the compressive force of the threaded bushing to hold them together. It provides support. The bushings go into these holes just fine, but the tuners themselves will require enlarging the hole up to, I believe, 10 millimeters to accept the base of the shaft. On a valuable vintage guitar, this would not be a wise move. You could try and drill those out with a honkin' big twist drill. You're likely to do some damage to the lacquer if you try that. I'm going to start off with, this is a violin peg reamer. This will get us up to about 9 millimeters or so at the top end here, and then I can just drill the last little bit by hand. Much safer. Or I suppose I could also use a cello reamer, which is quite a bit thicker. These are not tools your average sort of shade tree mechanic is going to have at home, though. I glued little dowels in all of the screw holes, and after they dried I cut them off flush. A little dab of touch-up marker. I have a little piece of tape on the drill bit to act as a reminder not to drill all the way through, because that's a nasty surprise.
Is it? Or is that just like, is that too many, like, steps in between? Well, he already died.
Here's the strip of wood from below the bridge. Is this thing factory? I tend to think not. Seems to be made out of bubinga or some similar reddish-brown wood. And it's rough and very irregular. And these guys, studs, fit in the holes just fine. Maybe it began life too tall? And this is a bit shaky. That's kind of interesting. There are little sharp points on the bottom of these, obviously used to make indents for starting a drill. One of the first things to check when working with a thin line hollow body like this is to see if it's actually possible to install the switch you intend to use. Because even among import three-way switches, which tend to be shorter, there's some variation in height. And you might find after getting everything wired up, you shove it in there and you can't actually retrieve it and tip it up to get through the hole. On a couple of occasions I've had to grind a couple of millimeters off the threaded end for the tip to actually allow it to come upwards. Let's see. Well, this will be fine. Yeah, no problem. That's good. Let's talk about wiring diagrams. For a very long time it was difficult to come up with one if you were looking for something out of the ordinary, even online. You know, there were repositories of information in various online forums where people would take the existing pictures and sort of doctor them in MS Paint, you know, and try to describe where the wires should go with varying degrees of accuracy. And there was a lot of conjecture, a lot of sort of, I don't know, armchair electronics going on, so half the times the schematics wouldn't work. Basic wiring is not too hard to pick up, but the resources used to be kind of scarce. At a certain point, people started posting better pictorial diagrams as opposed to schematics, which they're a different thing. They use symbols in a kind of visual shorthand for the circuit. These were much easier for the uninitiated to figure out. They show the pots and the pickups and where, which lug a wire should go to. This one is from guitarelectronics.com, which is a good site. They have a notice saying that republication or distribution is prohibited, and I will argue that this is fair use as I'm critiquing it. I like that website because things are listed in a very easy to find way. There's a table of contents and it's all very straightforward. The thing is though, if you search for the diagram of 2 humbuckers, 2 volumes, 1 tone, you're still going to have to do some figuring out, especially if you're dealing with an arch top that has F-holes. If you were an absolute noob, you might see a wire like this going from the pickup selector to this wire running between the jack and the tone pot, and imagine that you should come up with a way to join those wires in the middle of the run as shown, rather than over here at the second lug on the pot. I have actually encountered sort of kit-built guitars with that sort of thing going on. But you'll also see things like the little arrows indicating places that need to go to ground, or earth if you're in Britain. And you know that it should all be going to a single point on the back of a volume pot, so-called star grounding. How does that work when the switch is a great distance from the pots in something you have to fish around in an arch top? Not so great. So the goal in one of these is to come up with a system that is sort of linear, where the wires can be bundled together so they don't get tangled, and so it's strong. You know, you don't want to be tugging on a single wire to get things positioned, because if it breaks off, you're pulling everything out again and starting from scratch, that's a lot of time. So frequently I'll draw a little diagram for myself, just to remind me where I want certain wires to go to make this the neatest little package. Also, in better arch tops, it's usual to employ shielded cable like this. Gibson's always traditionally used this metal braided insulation. So that also adds a level of complexity too, as you may be attaching both the lead and the grounded insulation to a pot and a switch. There's planning involved. You also want to make sure that there's enough slack in your wiring to let you maneuver parts into place when you're inside the guitar, but not so much that it's flopping around and untidy, or could twist over on itself and get into a knot, which also happens sometimes. Another thing with arch tops is you may wish at some point to be able to switch out the pickups. Some players are notorious for this. If you plan ahead, you can make those connections close to the pickup holes, and then you won't have to take the whole harness out to do that job. That's a big time saver. So in this case, you wouldn't actually follow the diagram and connect this pickup lead over to the pot. You'd have a wire that would come up through the hole, and that way you could solder it in peace and quiet out here. The next tip would be to get yourself a device that'll hold the parts in the correct location and the correct distance away from each other. The cardboard box works nice. If you were doing something like Les Paul wiring that you know that you're going to encounter over and over again, you might make something out of plywood, but this is nice for a one-off like this. And when using the braided cable, rather than pull things perfectly tight, you have to remember that you're going to have to tip these pots a bit to work them into the holes, so you need to have a little bit of slack. I'm also going to put on some heat shrink tubing so there's no chance that this could accidentally ground out one of the hot lugs. Okay, before we go ahead and install some unknown pickups into a guitar, it's a good idea to test them out first to make sure they're functional. I've got the old multimeter here set to 20k ohms. Got the negative hooked up to the ground, and I use the positive probe on the hot wire. Just hold it in place with my thumb. And I'm going to end up with about 11.35 k ohms, which is a hot one. That's the bridge. Let's do the neck. And the neck pickup gives us 8.5. That's a good clean joint, nice and shiny. So we're all wired up and set for entry. Cable ties can be a big help. I saved some plastic drinking straws from back when they were a thing, and cut some short pieces, and I'm pushing them over the top of the shaft here. It'd be easier for me to grab hold of using a pair of tweezers or something to pull them up through the hole. There are other ways of doing this. You can wrap string around the posts, or you could make a little block of plastic or wood or something that has a hole for a thread that you can put through the hole in the guitar top and use that to pull them through. I use the cutoff end of a jack on a wire to pull the harness through. Here I'm installing the grounding wire that will go to the tailpiece. I'll fish that on up to a place where I can grab it, and that gets soldered to the back of the volume pot as well. There is definitely no room to spare. Okay. As an illustration, this is what I'm working with. So, this isn't going to go in that way. I have to tip it up into position. This is a handy little wrench designed for use with these knurled washers. I have a choice of different switch tips. I've decided to go with the cream because it seems to match the binding. Classy. And we'll go with some of these amber witch hat knobs. This scrap of wood here, I think would probably be better off on the inside of the instrument rather than the outside, because it would give the bushings a little more support. And that's more typical of what you see on one of these guitars. And it would also gain us another 2 millimeters worth of adjustment. So I'm going to glue that on the inside, I think. Black pickguard material. Pays to save scraps, just in case. I'm transferring the screw hole positions onto the risers, and I'll drill those out. I cut some blocks of mahogany to act as props and spent some time fitting those so they'd be a good snug fit. This one in front of the bridge is quite snug to counteract the forward roll of the bridge. Alright, I'm going to connect these leads. These leads are actually very generous. There's much more material here than I need. There's nothing wrong with having extra wire like this. In fact, if you were anticipating swapping these out at some point, it's probably best to leave some extra in there. But I don't think that's the case here. So I'm going to lop these off a little bit shorter, just to make it a bit more neat. There's something magical about heat shrink tubing. Look at it shrink. I'll strip off the end of the tailpiece grounding wire. Push that back and fold it over so that it will get pinched between the tailpiece and the body and make good contact. Bit of a vexing issue here. This cutout, when I get this in the correct place, puts the screws right on the edge of the hole. So there's a mark right there. I think I should probably glue something underneath to give it something to catch hold of. I'll have enough thread. I mean, there's only going to be like 3 threads in there, but it's enough to hold it. Yeah. One of those things. So there was a bunch of messing around with super glue. I got them in place on every corner, then had to go and pare back to make sure that they weren't too big to allow the pickup to actually sit in the place where it has to sit. So that was fun times. Okay, with a straight edge on the tops of the frets and checking out where the bridge is in relation to the top of the fingerboard, it looks like the action is, well, we would end up with a playable action, but we have 0 downward adjustability of the bridge. So we do need to change the neck angle slightly. I'm going to put a shim in that so that we're going to end up with a little bit more clearance, so that in the event that things move, we can always take the action down again. And this piece of veneer has to end up a wedge shape, tapering away to virtually nothing at the far end. So I've got some tape on it and put some super glue on the tape, and I'm gluing it to some more tape on a piece of plywood. Hold that in place and let it cure for a little while. With some pencil marks on there to guide me, I can then scrape and sand that down to the appropriate taper. At this point I endeavored to take the neck off, and I realized one of the screws was just like flopping around in there. It kind of confused me for a second. Oh, great. Nice. Okay, tried my screw extractor. Didn't work out. This thing is about the consistency of aluminum. And I tried to cut a slot through the top of it and make it into a slot-headed screw. No dice. And yet somehow it's so tightly wedged in there that even vice grips they'll mangle it, but they won't turn it. So here's me carving it out. A little bit frustrating. Yeah, I can think of other ways of doing this too, but they all end up being quite expensive and would involve me waiting around for weeks for specialized tools to show up. I got this done in 25 minutes. I suppose I could have jammed it full of epoxy putty and been just as far ahead of the game, but sometimes it's good to practice. While the glue cures, I can go ahead and drill and install the side dot markers. Okay, the frets on this guitar are quite low. They're around 30 thousandths of an inch, which is about 0.75 millimeters. And they're also fairly flat on top, which suggests these may have been dressed down at some point in the past, or maybe they're just that way from the factory. You wouldn't want them too much lower than 30 thousandths. That's, you know, the baseline for comfort at least. So I'm going to try and recrown them a bit. Make the tops of them a bit more round. This is a 3-corner file. I've ground the corners smooth so they're safe. And I'll just work my way in from the edges and try to reduce the line of Sharpie on the top to a much thinner line. This lets me track my progress. And obviously trying to preserve the sort of center line of the fret. Next comes sanding, then some polishing. Quick shot of black. So I'll replace the screws with some actual steel ones. The thing is, these are not all built the same either. These ones back here are fine, there's plenty of room, but if I replace the ones up front with this, I'll be within oh, maybe 1/10 of a millimeter of the surface of the fingerboard, which is too close for comfort. So I'm going to have to lop a little bit off of these. I'll lubricate the threads with a bit of paraffin wax. This is not an exhaustive cleaning. Adam likes patina. I'm just sort of getting off the top layer of grunge. For strings, I'm going to set it up with some 10 to 46 gauge. This is a good middle of the road kind of set. So I'm missing a strap button. That's kind of important. Okay, just setting the action. I'm going to go for about 5/64 on the bass and about 4 on the treble. Old school Gibson action. I'm going to set the pickup height. This is sort of a matter of taste, but with the strings depressed down at the last fret, I'm going to set the bass side of the neck pickup around 1/8 of an inch. And around 3/32 on the treble. Checking the intonation points of the saddles. It's actually remarkably good. So I play the string open and check with the 12th fret octave. Well, I think that's just about it for this one. We've taken a 70s Japanese clone guitar, rejected its reality, and substituted our own. The thing is, sometimes they refuse and just continue being what they really are, which is a Japanese clone. And they can be oddballs. The scale length, for instance, on this is about 25 inches, 635 millimeters, which is not something you see every day in the 1970s. National was using it. PRS eventually used it, but it's not the same thing as the guitar they were copying. It's got a fairly slim neck. The nut width is around 1 5/8, but you know, it's playable. It's got the roller bridge and a tailpiece with an axle in it, so the string feel is kind of bouncy, and there's a lot of those things add a lot of sort of metallic overtone. It's not the cleanest sound, but it's an interesting sound. It doesn't feel like a Gibson, doesn't feel like a Fender, it's very much its own thing. In terms of working on them, they present almost the level of frustration you get with a kit guitar that someone's tried to assemble, because you never know what surprises they've left for you. The non-standard pickup routes, if you go into something like this estimating the usual amount of time it takes to swap out a pickup on an ES335 and not take it into account, well, you know, you got to be resourceful. In that way, it's probably not a bad project for someone who wants to get into this kind of work in general, because it forces you into problem-solving mode immediately. You're not going to be on autopilot when you're working on one of these. Anyway, let's plug it in, see how it sounds.